It happened in the cold months in Rome, in rooms most of the faithful will never see. A German cardinal sat across from the men who got the oldest authority on earth. The doors were closed, and what passed between them in those hours would decide whether the church most of us were baptized into would still hold together in our lifetime. His name is Reinhard Marx. For 17 years he has been the Archbishop of Munich and Freising, one of the most powerful seats in Catholic Europe. He was made a cardinal by Benedict XVI in the year 2010. He sat for 10 years on the small circle of cardinals that Pope Francis trusted above all others, the council that helped him govern the entire church. When Marx speaks, Rome has always had to listen. And that is exactly why what is happening now frightens so many of the faithful. Before we go deeper, if you feel something stirring as you listen tonight, take one moment. Subscribe and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. There are more of us than you think, awake in the dark, asking the same questions. Now let us go where few are willing to look. To understand the storm gathering over Pope Leo XIV, you have to go back to the year 2019. That is when Cardinal Marx, then the head of the German bishops, helped open something the Germans called the Synodaler Weg. In English, we say the Synodal Way. It was meant to be a journey of listening, a response to the abuse crisis that had shattered trust in the German church. But it became something far larger than a season of repentance. It became a question aimed at the very center of Rome. Could the church in one country begin to change the things the church had taught everywhere for 2,000 years? The Synodal Way gathered bishops and lay people together around four great subjects: the way power is used inside the church, the life and meaning of the priesthood, the role of women, and the church's teaching on the human body and on love. These are not small questions. They reach down to the foundations. And as the assemblies met year after year, the proposals that came out of Germany grew bolder than anything Rome had seen rise from within its own ranks in living memory. The participants voted in favor of blessing same-sex couples. They voted to open a serious debate on the ordination of women to the priesthood. They asked for lay people to share in the governing of the church, to sit with the bishops and help decide matters of faith and morals by something close to a vote. To the men who built the Synodal Way, this was honesty. This was the church finally listening to its wounded people. But to Rome and to millions of ordinary Catholics watching from the pews, it sounded like something else. It sounded like a national church trying to walk its own road, away from the universal body, away from the chair of Peter. Rome did not stay silent. This is the part of the story that almost no one has told you in full. Again and again, quietly and then openly, the Vatican wrote to Germany. The letters were careful, the language of diplomats and theologians. But underneath the courtesy was a warning, and the warning never changed. It began early, in September of 2019, before the Synodal Way had even truly started. Cardinal Marc Ouellet, then in charge of the office that oversees the world's bishops, sent a letter to Germany. He told them plainly that the structure they had chosen was not valid, that this assembly had no power to make binding decisions on the matters it most wanted to decide. The Germans pressed forward anyway. Then in November of 2022, the Vatican published two more critiques from Cardinal Ouellet again, and from the cardinal who guarded the church's doctrine. They spoke of grave difficulties in what Germany was proposing. difficulties of theology, of pastoral care, of the very understanding of what the church is. Cardinal Ouellet warned of serious problems from the standpoint of how we understand the human person, the care of souls, and the very nature of the church. Rome was telling Germany, in the plain reading of those letters, that it was drifting toward a cliff. And in February of 2023, the Holy See took an extraordinary step. It said that no group within the German process had the authority to set up a new permanent council that would place bishops and lay people side by side over the government of the church. It said this could not bind the bishops. It said, in effect, that what Germany wanted to build had no foundation in the church that Christ established. 3 of the most senior cardinals in Rome, with the knowledge of the Pope, signed their names to that warning. Think about what that means. The men at the very summit of the church were telling one of the wealthiest, most influential national churches in the world to stop. And the German leaders, with Cardinal Marx among the most prominent of them, did not stop. They slowed. They negotiated, but they did not turn back. That is the tension. That is the fracture that no headline fully captured, because it was happening in letters and in closed rooms, in the language of men who have spent their lives avoiding the word that everyone feared. Schism, a tearing of the church. Then came the document that poured oil on the fire. In December of 2023, Rome released a declaration called Fiducia Supplicans. It opened a narrow door. It said a priest could give a simple, spontaneous blessing to people in irregular situations, including same-sex couples, without it being a marriage, without ceremony, without the look of approval for the union itself. It was meant to be small, a pastoral mercy, not a change in doctrine. But in Germany, the small door was thrown wide open. Some German dioceses began to speak of blessing celebrations, planned and beautiful liturgical events with music and song, the very thing the Vatican had said this was not. And the German bishops split apart over it before the eyes of the world. On one side stood Bishop Georg Batzing, the head of the German Bishops' Conference, who welcomed the opening and defended the practice of blessing such couples with what he called appreciation. On the other side stood the bishops of Cologne, Augsburg, Eichstätt, Passau, and Regensburg, who refused. They pointed to Rome's own words and said the German guidelines went beyond what the declaration allowed. One German house was now visibly divided against itself, bishop against bishop, over a single act of blessing. To the faithful watching, it no longer looked like a debate. It looked like the beginning of a break. And remember why this began at all. The wound underneath everything was the abuse scandal, the betrayal of children and of trust by men who wore the collar and were shielded by the institution. In Germany, the reports landed like hammer blows, diocese after diocese, naming the cover-ups, the files that were hidden, the bishops who looked away. That horror is what gave the reformers their moral fire. They could stand up and say the old system failed. It protected itself instead of the lambs. And so the old system must be opened up and shared and held accountable. There is truth in that grief, and the faithful must never forget it. But the question Rome kept asking was sharper. Does the failure of men to live the faith mean the faith itself must be rewritten? Or does it mean those men must repent and the faith be believed at last? That is the fork in the road, and Germany and Rome have stood at it, staring at each other for years. Now you must understand who Cardinal Marx really is, because the story does not work without him. This is not some fringe rebel. This is a man Benedict raised to the cardinalate, a man Francis pulled into his innermost circle to help reform the whole church. He led the bishops of Germany. He once headed the commission of the bishops' conferences of the whole European Union. For a time, he was among the most trusted voices in all of Rome. And then, in 2021, he did something that stunned the Catholic world and tells you everything about the kind of man he is. In a letter dated the 21st of May, 2021, Cardinal Marx offered to resign, not because of personal scandal touching him alone, but because of the abuse crisis and the Church's failure to face it. He wrote that he wanted to share responsibility for the catastrophe, to carry part of the weight of the institution's sins on his own shoulders. He spoke of a dead end, of an institution that had handled these horrors so badly it had lost its way. He asked the Pope to let him step down from one of the great seats of Europe. It was an act almost without precedent. A prince of the church asking to give up his crown as an act of penance, and Pope Francis said no. In June of 2021, Francis declined the resignation. He told Marx to continue as Archbishop of Munich. He thanked him for his Christian courage that does not fear to be humbled before the reality of sin. He agreed that the history of abuse and the way the church had handled it was a catastrophe. But he compared Marx to the Apostle Peter, who once tried to step away as a sinner and was told instead, "Shepherd my sheep." "Carry on," Francis told him, "stay." So here is the man at the center of this, not a villain, a figure of real conscience and real ambition both, a reformer who has pushed the church further than Rome was willing to go and who once tried to lay down his own office as a sacrifice. That is what makes the conflict so heavy. It is not the church against an enemy. It is the church against part of itself. For years, all of this lived under Pope Francis. He held the tension in his own hands. He let Germany speak. He let them gather. But through his cardinals, he drew the lines they could not cross. In February of 2024, the Vatican went further still, telling the German bishops directly that they could not even vote to set up the democratic body they dreamed of. The council that would let lay people share authority over questions of faith and morals. The answer from Rome was the same as it had always been. You may listen. You may not rule the faith by show of hands. And then, on the 8th of May, 2025, everything changed. Francis was gone. The conclave gathered. The smoke turned white. And out onto the balcony stepped a man no one fully expected, Robert Prevost, an American, the first son of the United States ever to sit on the throne of Peter. He took the name Leo XIV. And the great unfinished war over Germany landed on his desk on the very first day. Here is what is true, and here is where honesty matters more than drama. There is no proof, no documented record of a single sealed meeting in which Pope Leo handed down one final verdict and watched Cardinal Marx rise and walk out of the room. That precise scene, a decision and a walk out and the exact words spoken, is not something the Church has confirmed. We will not pretend to you that it is. The faithful deserve the truth, not invented theater. But here is what is real, and it is heavier than any invented scene. Pope Leo has not stayed quiet. He carries the same conviction his predecessors held. The Vatican's position under him has not softened. Synodality, the shared listening and walking together, is welcomed, but it can never become a second authority sitting above the bishops, a parallel power that folds the faith up or down. In the order of the Church, Only the successor of Peter stands at that height. That is the line. It has not moved. And under Pope Leo, the German question has not gone away. The German bishops have continued to press their project in Rome. They have sought audiences. They have brought their plans for a permanent synodal body, a council where lay people would share decision-making power equal to the bishops, where teaching might be changed by majority, where even the finances of the church would be held in common hands. This is the very thing Rome warned against for years, and it is now being carried to the feet of an American pope who spent his own career inside the Vatican office that judges the world's bishops. He knows exactly what is being asked of him. So when you see a title that speaks of a decision and a cardinal walking out and words that were said, understand what it truly points to. It points to a moment the whole church can feel coming, a reckoning that has been delayed for 6 years and can no longer be delayed forever. The faithful are asking the question out loud now. What will Leo do? Will he bless the German road or close it? Will he let one nation rewrite what the whole church believes? Or will he say the word that Rome has avoided for so long and call it what it is? No one can tell you the hour, and anyone who gives you a date, who tells you the exact day the church will break or be healed, is not telling you the truth. The Spirit moves in its own time. But the pieces are all on the board. A pope who has spent his life defending doctrine. A cardinal of real conscience and real defiance who has pushed his church to the edge. A movement that has voted for things the church has never permitted. And a chain of letters, real letters, signed by real cardinals, warning year after year that this road leads toward a tearing of the seamless garment of Christ. Why does this reach you tonight alone with your phone in the dark? Because this is not a quarrel between strangers in a far country. This is the church your grandmother prayed in. This is the faith handed to you by people who are gone now, who knelt and believed that what the church taught in Munich was the same as what it taught in Rome and in your own parish. The thing being tested in Germany is whether that can still be true. Whether the faith is one thing everywhere, or whether it can become many things country by country, vote by vote. The men who built the synodal way believe they are saving the church by changing it. They look at empty pews and falling numbers and fleeing young people, and they say the old answers are not enough. And there is real pain in that. It is not all ambition. Some of it is grief. But Rome, across 3 popes now, has answered with something ancient and stubborn that the church is not ours to remake, that its teachings were not voted into being and cannot be voted away, that a bishop, even a cardinal, even a pope, is a servant of a deposit of faith he did not invent and may not sell. This is the wall Germany has been pushing against, and it has not fallen. What was said in all those rooms across all those years comes down to something simple under all the careful diplomatic words. Rome said, "You may walk with us, but you may not walk away from us and call it the same road." And Germany has not yet decided whether it can accept that. That is the true drama. Not a single dramatic exit, but a slow and terrible question that will not resolve. Will the German church stay inside the universal church, or will it, step by step, become something else? For you, the believer who loves this church, even when it wounds you, there is something to hold on to here. The church has faced this before. It has been torn and it has been mended. It has had cardinals who defied Rome and popes who held the line and faithful people in the dark who kept praying while the powerful argued. The faith you received did not survive 2,000 years by being fragile. It survived because in every generation there were ordinary souls who refused to let go of the truth, even when the great ones wavered. So watch what Leo does. Watch the appointments he makes, the letters he sends, the bishops he raises, and the ones he passes over. The decision about Germany will not come as a single thunderclap. It will come the way Rome always moves, slowly, in writing, in who is chosen and who is not. But it is coming. And those who are awake, those who have ears to hear, will see it when it arrives. The German bishops wanted to change the church. 3 popes told them where the line was drawn. Now the first American pope holds the pen. And the question that has hung over Rome for 6 long years, the question the faithful whisper late at night, has never been closer to its answer. What was said behind those doors was the oldest sentence the church knows. You are free to leave. You are not free to take the church with you. Hold to the faith that was handed to you. Pray for the men who carry it, and keep watching, because what comes next will tell us all what kind of church our children will inherit.